Hello, my awesome tuber friends. Hello again, it's Megan. And here in my neck of the woods, it is an awesome, amazing, lovely, rainy weekend. And that is exactly the reason why I decided today would be the perfect day to get out of a hot shower, dress up in some sexy jammies, and hang out with y'all talking about coloring. Coloring? Did she say coloring? Coloring like coloring books? Isn't that for kids? Exactly. It is for kids. And if you made that statement, you're part of the way there to understanding why I think it's so important that I'm not just going to do one, but at least 2 episodes on coloring. That's right, you heard it here, folks. Because I think coloring can be super therapeutic to your recovery. Hang out and I'll tell you why. I'm really excited about these. So before we get started, I just want to tell you a really quick story. When I first mentioned to my fiance that I was planning on doing a video about coloring in coloring books, he looked at me and said, like coloring? I said, yeah. And he goes, well, isn't your channel about crafting? I mean, coloring books don't really seem like really a craft. And I said, stop limiting me! But then I thought about it, and he's absolutely right. In a lot of respects, you could consider that coloring would be considered more of a hobby or an activity, hence the reason activity books, as opposed to a craft. But at the same time, you are creating a piece of art. There's artistic expression that goes into it. You can finish a piece and have a finished project. And I don't see why it couldn't be, in some respects, considered a craft. There can be craftiness to it. And there's also things that you can do with the pages that you color that can be crafty. You can take these coloring pages and you can use them as wrapping paper, or you can frame them. Not even gonna joke, you can frame them. Some of the things that are in these adult coloring books now, not even gonna lie, are totally frameable pieces of artwork. And so yeah, I think that while it would be considered more of a hobby, it can be considered a craft as well. On the other side of that though, the recovery side of that, I think coloring is super important and super therapeutic. There's a meditative aspect, I think, to coloring, and that's why a lot of art therapy and art therapists will use coloring and coloring books in their sessions, so that way you're able to let your mind go and be more open and honest while you're working on something. And I think that and again, I'm not a doctor, but I also think that there's a part of them that can watch the way that you're coloring and how you're coloring and see maybe the mood that you might be in. You might be saying one thing but aggressively coloring on the page, and it can really show a lot about what you might be holding in and not saying. So I want to kind of go over all of that, but to get back to the idea of kids and coloring being for children. Yes, I think coloring in coloring books is totally a children's activity. But there's a different mindset that children are in. Children have an amazing capacity for imagination, and they are far less fettered by all of the adult emotions and struggles and things that go through our daily minds. I mean, adults, we're constantly thinking about, sorry, my heater just came on. I hope that's not too loud for you guys. we're constantly bombarded with thoughts of, you know, how work is going, or having to pay the bills and coming home and cook dinner and managing our schedules, and all of those things, when you take all of them and you compile them into one big massive, you know, daily structure, they can become so overwhelming. And there have been plenty of times where I have come home from work and literally just been like, I want to do nothing. I don't want to talk to anybody. I mean, even the TV is just on so that it can be on in the background. I'm not even paying attention to it because my mind is genuinely just fried. I get tired. And I think that coloring can be a super creative way to meditate and get your mind back into that childish mindset where you're able to just, even for 10 or 15 minutes, if I could spend 10 or 15 minutes of my day being completely unfettered by adult thoughts, if I could stop adulting for 10 to 15 minutes, how awesome would that be? How therapeutic could that be? Where I could just let all that adult nonsense go and go back to being a kid. And that's completely aside from the fact that there are, you know, now adult coloring books and there's coloring apps for your phone, and I don't think it's the same. I think the feeling of colored pencils and crayons in your hand, and yes, okay, we're gonna get this out of the way real quick. I understand that I do not say crayons the right way. I've always said it crayon and not crayon. So I am aware that I am not saying it like the rest of the populace. I have been called out on this many, many, many times. And I'm okay with it. I have come to terms with the fact that my pronunciation of the main product that Crayola makes, or used to make, now it's all sorts of things, I'm very well aware and have come to terms with myself in the fact that I will never say crayon as a 2-syllable word. It is crayon to me. So you'll just have to get over that because I have. Completely lost my train of thought. But when we're talking about coloring, that's right, the adult coloring books. It doesn't even have to be adult coloring books. In fact, one of the books that I have here is a kid's activity book, and it's just regular coloring pictures. What's awesome about these is that there's lots of extra space in here for you to create your own world, which is its own separate form of meditation, where you can fill in the details yourself and you don't have to be stressed out by all of this stuff. You can paint the world the way that you want it to be, and I think that's awesome. And like I said, the smell and the feel of holding a crayon in your hand. So, for instance, any of you who went to college with me, especially any of my college roommates, will probably recognize this box because, yes, I have had this box since I was in college, marked Stuffs for the Drawing, and it is an amalgamation of colored pencils and pastels and drawing pencils and markers, and these are things, I mean, they keep getting swapped out as they break, but this thing, it's like a mecca of just artistic expression, just sitting down one day and deciding to pull this out, and who knows what I could come up with. And so there's a little bit of magic in this box, and that's fantastic to have a little bit of, you know, there's history to it. I actually had this box all throughout my alcoholism, my heavy alcohol days, and it's one of the things that survived. And so how cool is that this came with me? My artistic expression was able to take the journey with me. So, now that I've rambled on forever, I am going to throw in a couple of clips here, because I actually did some shopping around. You're going to see one clip from a dollar store and one clip from a grocery store, just to show how accessible coloring books can be. And I will be honest with you, I am a very cheap shopper. That is something that we'll deal with all throughout these videos, is finding cheap, inexpensive ways to start up your hobby and or craft. So I'm going to throw these videos in right here for you. So suffice it to say that coloring books are super easily accessible and you can find them anywhere. And I know to a lot of people, they might say, well, of course they are. I mean, there's coloring books literally everywhere you go. But there are a lot of people out there who either don't have children, don't have grandchildren, and or there's no children in the family, so they don't normally have to go shopping for things like that. And so they probably haven't thought about buying a coloring book in years. So they're probably all around you all the time. You've just never paid attention to them. So I just wanted to show that they're super easily accessible and that there's all different sorts. And like I said, I mean, I picked up this one, and this one at my local dollar store. And I like to get them from the dollar store as opposed to the grocery store or something like that because they are significantly higher priced at the grocery store than they would be for $1. Now, what started me on all of this is when I first got out of detox. I was going to a specific sort of group, a recovery group. And one of the things that they talk about is having different tools in your toolbox. And things that you can go to when you're struggling, something that you can do to keep your hands busy, keep your mind occupied. And one of those things that came up, obviously, was coloring. And there was a gentleman who was super kind enough to go out and buy some adult coloring books and drawing or coloring implements and bring them in. And I jumped on that because at the time I was living in a camper, and I didn't have a whole lot of space, and it seemed like a perfectly great thing to keep me busy, a hobby, if you will. And so the books that he brought in were actually these coloring books where you get to learn a little bit of history about the artist, and then it shows you the different pictures that are in here. And then you'd actually learn a little bit about each piece of art, and then when you open it up, there would be the actual painting on one side, and then a version that you get to color on the other. Now, when I talked about framing these, I wasn't joking. These are actually perforated on the inside so that once you're done with them, you can pull them out and you can frame them. And I think that that's a super awesome gift to give to somebody. And, again, you can buy these frames. You can buy frames at the dollar store, too, for super cheap. And and then the other cool thing is that you don't have to follow those rules. You can turn these into you could completely change the color scheme, turn them into whatever you want. So the reason why this is going to be more than one episode long is because I don't want to actually do any coloring today. What I want to do is give you the explanation for why I think coloring is so important. And I'm going to go into that when we actually do a coloring session. But I want to let you know that I have a mission for you all for next weekend. What I want you to do is go out, whether to your dollar store, local store, whatever, and pick up a couple of coloring books. Because what I want to do next week is spend some time actually sitting down and coloring with you guys. And I think that if you get to do it yourself and you get to hear me explain why as we're doing it, that how meditative it can be, and how you're able to get your moods out or your frustrations out. I also suggest, I was going to bring this up in the other video, but I'll tell you now, I would also suggest that, you know how we used to keep notepads near your phone when you had to make phone calls. So if you were sitting there on hold or it's a frustrating call, you had something to doodle on or write notes down when you had to. Try doing the same thing with a coloring book. I know most people have cell phones now, but next time you have to make a phone call where you're expecting to be on hold for a super long time, try bringing a coloring book with you, so that way, instead of taking out your frustration on the person who finally picks up after going through 20 minutes of automated deal, and instead of taking it out on the person who finally answers, you can take that all out on the coloring book instead. You have something to distract you so you don't feel like you've been wasting your time for 20 minutes. Try doing something like that, and you might notice that the anxiety level and the wait time doesn't bother you quite so much. Either way, you're going to have to wait. So you might as well do something creative with your time or sit there and be miserable. And again, too much time in the head isn't always a great thing. So I've rambled on a whole lot about coloring books, And again, this is why I'm going to break this into a couple of episodes, because I actually want to lay down on the floor with some pillows in a comfy nest and hang out and color with y'all. So I hope this explains at least a little bit of why I wanted to talk about coloring. And next week, like I said, we'll get together, get your coloring books, get your crayons, your colored pencils, your markers, even if you're a more permanent person. Come on back next weekend, hang out with me, and we'll curl up with a nice hot or cold beverage, depending on how you are. And let's heal. Let's do some healing. So I hope you've enjoyed this video so far. I'll see you all next week for some awesome coloring time.